Hey guys! So, today we are going to talk about portfolios and what to consider when you're making a portfolio. So let's get into it. Now, this is a little bit of a tricky one because what makes a good portfolio varies a lot depending on the sort of programmer that you're looking to be, or at least the sort of person that you're trying to relay that you are to whoever's going to look at your portfolio. Now, let's just break down the reason as to why you are making a portfolio in the first place. So, a portfolio, regardless of what it is, if we really get down to it and go a little bit more generic, is a way for you to relay to somebody else what you are capable of doing. And if we think about that for just a little bit, that is the same goal or the same thing that your CV is trying to achieve on your behalf. Through your CV, you are trying to communicate to a potential employer, for example, or potential customer, or whoever is reading it, what you know. And ideally, you want to give them a sensation of what they can expect if they hire you, for example, or if they, consult you. Whichever way you're gonna, whatever you're gonna do. And when you kind of think about it that way, that I hope makes you kind of put this portfolio thing in perspective, because I've spoken to quite a few, say, front-end developers, for example, who have it in their heads, and unfortunately there are a lot of front-end developers out there on the internet who I would not call front-end developers. I would call them web designers, who will sell you the idea that the way to make a good portfolio is to make very nice-looking websites or static websites, for example, with a lot of CSS and beautiful images, and basically make something that is very visually appealing. But I'm here to tell you that there are many ways that you can make a portfolio, and I think that that is just one way to make a portfolio. Because if you think about it, if you make a beautiful website from a design perspective, and you make this, maybe you make several, maybe you make a bunch of really nice artboards, and you really think it through, and you make something that is genuinely beautiful to look at. But the application is a to-do app, which has no server, it's a very trivial application. Now, that might be fine if you are applying for a web design job, or if you're not trying to get a job as a professional software developer, front-end developer, full-stack developer, call it what you want. And the reason why this is not a good thing is because when your employer looks at your portfolio, your employer is not looking for a designer. Your employer is looking for a programmer. And you have not communicated that you know how to write good software just because the website is beautiful. You have communicated that you have design skills and that you have a taste for UI and so forth, but you haven't communicated the right thing. And so the same thing goes for, say, backend developers. How do you make a portfolio as a backend developer? Well, if you think about it, what is relevant to a backend developer when they want to communicate that they have skills? Well, the most obvious way a backend developer can communicate that they are good at what they do, apart from the CV, because the CV is always the thing. Like, if you have a lot of experience and you have a lot of skills on your CV, that is a very strong indicator to your skill level. That portfolio should just be a supplement to what you have on your CV, ideally. Some people, like freelancers, for example, they have a tougher time because they usually work on a client-by-client basis, and there's a lot of uncertainty for a lot of employers when it comes to freelancers, because it's the differences between freelancer to freelancer differs quite a bit. So for them, a portfolio is very, very useful because it gives a very concrete example of what they know and what they're good at. And it's also a very good marketing thing if you're your own boss. But for a backend developer, having an open source project or contributing to open source projects, to having maybe a library or something of that nature, or even having a non-trivial application that uses a CSS framework or something of that nature, is going to be a good portfolio or a portfolio project. So what I'm trying to give you here is a sense, it's not necessarily a concrete example of exactly how to make a good portfolio, but I want you to think about what you are making. Like, I've had a few subscribers who've asked me about how they can enhance their chances of getting a job at different companies, and I always say the same thing. What role are you looking for? Because the portfolio that you're making has to be relevant to the position that you are applying for. Now, you can make more generic things. I mean, you can be a jack of all trades type of person and make applications or projects and so forth. There's so many ways that you can communicate that you have skills, because remember what I said first, that's what you're doing. What you're trying to do is to communicate that you have skills in the relevant thing that you are applying for. That's it. That's all you're going for. So if you are a computer scientist, well, then it would make no sense for you to make a portfolio with beautiful websites. Now, would it? Because you're not trying to be a web designer or a front-end developer or something like that. So how can you make a example or a proof of concept, if you will, that indicates that you are good at what you do? And some people will ask me things such as, is it okay to use frameworks? Is it okay to use this or that? That's a very tricky question to answer. Like, some people will tell me that, oh, I'm going to use something like Firebase, and then I'm going to use Bootstrap and just make a project that I can demo to a customer or an employer. And I said that's fine, because depending on what you're going for, your client or your boss may not care that you're using a framework. If they're looking for a CSS expert and all your portfolios are using Bootstrap, that's a little bit of a problem depending on the viewpoint of your boss, because that is depending on what you're going for. If you're trying to show that you are really good with CSS and you only use frameworks to do your job, that's not a good thing, because that doesn't indicate skill. But if you're applying for a position as, say, a backend developer, and you have made a really sophisticated application, like something like a forum or something of that nature, an application that has a little bit of sophistication to it, and you're using a framework just to get the UI to look kind of nice, so that, like, remember, like, the focus isn't that you are good with CSS, the focus is that you're good at systems development, then it's perfectly fine. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, you have to think about what you are telling the person looking at your portfolio with your portfolio. So, to end on something concrete, if you are trying to be something of, say, a web designer or something more front-end heavy, then making something that is very beautiful or a beautiful interface is a fairly important thing. If you are trying to be a backend developer, a full stack developer, and you're trying to communicate these sort of things, then you have to make a non-trivial example. A to-do app does not cut it, guys, unless you are a junior. Juniors can make smaller applications, but if you are at the mid-level or senior and you want to make a portfolio, ideally, I would argue the best possible thing that you can possibly make is something that is actually used in the real world. Like, start your own little startup, create a product that you either make some small amount of money from, or something that is a little bit more serious. If you have some open source libraries with a few downloads, that's also portfolio material, and it's really powerful for you when you sit there and talk to your future employer, because that carries a lot of weight. Because remember the perspective of your employer. Your employer is trying to figure out how good you are, and if you're good at the things that they care about. And that's the mindset you need to have when you're structuring your portfolio. Have a great day.